تذكر يوما كنت تعانق دمعة الفكر تناجي الله في صبر وترجو رحمة تسري فعاش القلب إخلاصا وصرت تحوم كالطير تحلق في ثقافات وتنهل من ربى الخير ترى ما زلت تذكرها وتذكر روعة.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وأصحابه وبارك وسلم أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Always remember that's not just a greeting but indeed a universal message whereby we beseech the Almighty, our Creator, to send His peace and blessings upon each and every one watching today. Welcome to another edition of Sunday Forum, coming to you from the studios based here at the Broadcast Center, the Al-Quds complex in Gatesville, Cape Town. The Sunday Forum, what is it all about? Well, it's all about interesting topics, current topics, thought-provoking topics, inspirational topics, and in the process, we grapple with the issues of the day. What do we have on the program today? Two topics, both centered around our youth. The first one is a disturbing one, but a very important one. The topic is, are our youth disconnecting from religion? That's the first part of the question. And the second part is, if so, and why? The second segment of the program today will be hosted by Dr. Syed Parker, where he'll be talking to two amazing young ladies who are part of the Mail & Guardian 200 Young South Africans. So, as you would have probably made up by now, these are very vital topics to discuss. Some of them positive and good, the others very challenging, but we need to grapple with them. Therefore, we have assembled today two very, very formidable panels to discuss these issues. Via Zoom, all the way from London, Sheikh Ajmal Masroor, Assalamu alaikum, welcome to Cape Town and welcome to Masjid Al-Quds.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm grateful for this opportunity.
Thank you so much. It's absolutely our honor. Then in the studio, we have Professor Abdul Qadir Tayyib of the Department of Religious Studies, UCT. Assalamu alaikum, Professor. How are you?
Alaikum salam. Thank you very much. I'm very well.
Next to him, we have young Ilyas Amin, Chair of the UCT Muslim Students Association. Ilyas, Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam wa barakatuh.
Are you well? And last but certainly not least, someone that's no stranger to the Al-Quds family, Sheikh Muhammad West, who is both an imam, a leader of the community, and I always take great pride in saying a chartered accountant as well. Sheikh, welcome to you as well.
Shukran so much, Abdul Sattar. Assalamu alaikum to all the viewers.
Professor Abdul Qadir, Sheikh Muhammad and Ilyas, I just want to, by way of introduction, before I pose the first question, give to the studio audience, as well as the viewers today, a brief glimpse of our guest all the way from London. As I said, he resides in London, born in Bangladesh and studied in Bangladesh for 7 years. Then he went on to Syria and Egypt, where he studied politics and the Arabic language. He holds a master's in Islamic studies. He has a diploma in relationship therapy, a very important course that is, as well as counseling. Authored a number of books on marriage, and rotates as an imam between several mosques in the UK. Sheikh Ajmal, may I pose the first question to you?
Sure, you can.
Sheikh, you have certainly touched a very raw nerve why our children are leaving Islam by way of a Friday khutbah. What made you choose such a sensitive topic for a Friday talk?
In the UK, over the last 3 months or maybe 6 months, I've been dealing with number of active cases where people have come to me asking for counseling, spiritual counseling for the fact that their children are leaving Islam, or children come to me saying, we want to leave Islam. we're not sure. Can we please have some places that are safe where we can talk freely without prejudice, without fear? I have many parents who call me up. In fact, only in the weekend, last week actually, on Friday, maybe on Thursday, I received an email from a head teacher of a school who said, one of my girls, she has been in my school and she has just announced that she is no longer a Muslim. She is in an Islamic school and she is not even 16, but she has chosen to leave Islam. What do I do? So it's not just an random thought that came to my mind. It's been bubbling in my head for a while. And the more cases that come to me, the more I realize that our community is either in denial or not dealing with the issue head on. We need to talk about it. We need to explore the root causes why our children, some of them, are leaving Islam, and we need to find a solution. And finally, my father told me something when he was still alive, may Allah have mercy on him. He said, in the 60s, when he was traveling throughout the UK, he met a retired army general who told him that, young man, you are in this country as an economic migrant. You will not be ever accepted as a local. You'll always remain a foreigner. In fact, we don't want you, but we will have all your children. They will leave their faith and they will leave their religion. They will leave their culture and they will embrace ours. My father used to remind me this so that I would remember. Unfortunately, his fear and that man's prediction is becoming true on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you so much for that, Sheikh. Very disturbing, but very interesting at the same time. Professor Abdul Qadir, is there a noticeable pattern of disconnection here in our community from religion by young people?
Thank you very much, first of all, Sheikh Masroor, for raising this issue. I think he has touched on, especially in his, both in his introductory comments now, as well as in the khutbah that I listened to and I read. I think the major issue that he has raised is something that it's not exactly the same in South Africa, but certainly something that we can recognize. You know, it's questions of what is being spoken about in the mosque, what the mosque do, what is the kind of parenting that basically is, what kind of patterns of parenting that Muslims are practicing as such. But I do think that before we go into this, I think I want to basically, you know, not raise the questions so much the difference between the UK and South Africa, although I think they are considerable. But I would like to sort of identify this particular talk, if I can call it, the khutbah, because I am a student of modern Islamic thought, modern Islamic development. So I'd like to basically talk a little bit about that in two respects. The one is that, in my view, over the last 100 years, you know, since the British colonized India, there have always been Muslims, and some way or the other, who actually say that, you know, who complain that Islam is not keeping up with the times. And I think that this is, we need to basically take that historical perspective into consideration as well. That there is something not right, maybe the modernization sometimes, or, you know, development of the modern state, or in South Africa, for example, apartheid, you had people who were raising this issue, saying that you need to do something about it. But I think that must be contrasted with the fact that, and therefore a lot of people will find some problems with, you know, Islam or Muslims or whatever. And the other question that we need to basically put into the question, into this discussion, is that there are hundreds of young Muslims who actually are turning towards Islam.
Okay.
So we should not really, you know, isolate, you know, these phenomena. If you want to see this phenomena, I think that the Muslims, or perhaps, you know, religious and religious groups, particularly Muslim groups, I mean, apart from COVID, you could not find parking outside this mosque on a Friday, or any mosque in Cape Town, and for that matter, in the mosque that I've seen in Europe and particularly in the UK. So I think one needs to balance that about, so therefore we need to begin to ask, what is it that is, you know, negatively, you know, what is it that people are worried about, you know, in Islam, how Muslims are not addressing it. I'm not necessarily saying these are not, but I also think one needs to put into consideration the other part of it as well, because I think there are forces that are affecting some people more than others. Maybe if I could just make one last point in relation to that and pick up on a statement that I think I picked up from Professor Sheikh Masroor's talk. He was saying that we need to make, there is, or I don't know whether he affirmed it or so, but he raised the issue that is very familiar in Muslim discussions, or what I call Muslim discourse, that we need to make a distinction between Islam and Muslims.
Yes.
I actually don't agree with that.
Okay.
Because you cannot, that is a very common way. People who complain about Muslims always say, you know, we don't have really good Muslims, but we have Islam. And I think this is really one of the really big problems about doing this. You have to basically address the issue as Muslims. Once you start developing this whole idealistic idea of what is Islam and basically create something completely different, you basically estrange Muslims from themselves and also from the teachings of Islam. So I think that, you know, in classical Islamic thought or in Muslim societies, they used to make a distinction between Muslim and mu'min. One can perhaps find it in the Quran. There are other scholars, you know, it was not something that was agreed upon. But that distinction is better than to say, you know what, you have Islam and no real Muslims.
Okay.
I think that is fundamentally it's a problem of identity, and I think this is what the Sheikh is bringing up as such.
Okay, thank you so much. Sheikh West, you do a lot of interaction with youth, young people. I've heard so much about it. In the masjid as well as in the workplace as a chartered accountant, is this a general problem confined to the youth or just across the board in society?
So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and again, Alhamdulillah for this opportunity to speak here. So, we need to understand the context that we live in. Look, the dominant world, philosophy is secular Western philosophy. And that's the dominant philosophy, and we're using with social media and technology. This has now been spread throughout the world. And secularism, one of the arkan, the pillars of secularism, is to confine religion to a very private, insignificant space. And so it is a phenomenon not experienced only by Muslims. The churches are empty, synagogues are empty. In the workplace, our non-Muslim friends and colleagues very seldomly would speak about religion. It is really practiced only as a social thing, you know, on religious occasions or on weddings. And really, as Professor Tayyub mentioned, perhaps the most observant religion in the world is still Muslims. Our Jumu'ahs are still packed. You know, Ramadan comes, vast majority of the Ummah is still fasting in Ramadan. Alhamdulillah, may Allah keep it that way. Amen. But as we know even from the Prophet ﷺ's tradition, that as the time goes on, being disconnected with Islam is going to become prevalent, and it's going to be more difficult to maintain your Islam. And so when you're bombarded with an ideology that looks to relegate religion out of your worldly life, you know, your life, and it becomes a very private thing, it's only natural that people would start moving away. And so, one scholar mentioned that us living in a secular society, we are at high risk. If you think of COVID, we are at high risk of infection. And the demographic that is most at risk, and for all of us, when were we the most away from our deen? When were we the naughtiest? In our teenage years, in our young, 20s, when we are most rebellious, when we're trying to form our own opinion, we don't only mirror our parents' opinions. So that age is an at-risk age. And again, we find this in the Sunnah, where the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says that of the 7 special people shaded on the day of Qiyamah would be a young person that spends his youth in the deen, meaning it's rare. You don't find it very common, even from the best of families. And even the walis of Allah, in their youth, they were also a bit naughty. But they came back, alhamdulillah. They came back as their brains and, as we became more sensible. So, undoubtedly, this is a trend, a global trend. And yes, it is affecting the Muslim population. Generally, if we look at our madrasas, how few people are, our population is growing, but our madrasas are becoming smaller. How common the hijab is. So definitely religious observance is becoming less. And amongst our youth, in particular, it is something for us to be aware of. But we do have bright lights that we take pride in. But definitely we need to address the issue.
Ilyas Amin, is this a topic that you guys, as you always, you people would always refer to each other, as you guys discuss on campus? Widely discussed topic on campus?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It definitely is something that is discussed. I wouldn't say it's discussed openly, publicly, but it is something that university students do discuss on a regular basis. But I think that what one has to establish first is how do we define religion? Because a lot of the time we may think that religion is just ahkam and fiqh. But as we know, when we study the religion is iman, Islam and ihsan. So a lot of the time when people maybe say they are leaving Islam, they may be leaving the ahkam aspect, but maybe they maintain that sense of spirituality. So I think one of the challenges of the secular world that we live in is that we've divorced spirituality from Islam.
I think that's a very important point that you are making today.
Absolutely.
So what we have to do is that we have to show people that being a good person, honesty, decency, integrity, courage, all these things are just facets and tenets of this religion. And just because you may be struggling with a particular ahkam aspect like salah or hijab, does not mean that you're no longer Muslim.
Yeah.
That's your challenge that Allah has given to you, and we have to create a space where we facilitate that growth as young people. Secondly, I think it's also important to ask the question, I do believe that some young people are disconnecting, but I do believe that most young people have been disconnected. And what I mean by that is that they haven't necessarily done the disconnecting themselves. It's the society that they've grown up in that has fundamentally disconnected them from the religion. And I think that before you can disconnect yourself from Islam, you first had to have been connected in the first place. And Abu Hanifa said that if the kings knew what we had, they would send their armies to come and take it away from us. So it's something profound about Islamic knowledge and knowing about your Creator and knowing about this religion that draws you to it beyond just speaking and performing actions. So we have to create a space where people realize that Islam is more than just what you do, but it's how you feel, it's the way you act towards people.
Okay. Sheikh Ajmal, I want to ask you the next question. After you gave your talk, what has been the reaction like?
Has been positive mainly, and there has been a lot of introspection amongst the British Muslim community. I do understand the experience of South Africa is very different to ours, actually 200 or 300 years difference because of the longest living as well as established communities in South Africa. We are only third generation as we see and speak, and still we have institutional problems within our country, Islamophobia, racism, barriers, etc. But this speech wasn't directed as the outer threats or challenges that we are facing. I was asking for Muslims to do an introspection. So I was asking, why do we have our masajids still closed to our sisters? Why do we have by the way, more sisters, more girls leave Islam than men. And most of the time their reasons for leaving is from a number of people have written to me directly, and I can give you quotes, that we have left Islam because of misogyny. We've left Islam because we have no real access to a mosque. We're given tokenistic one, a broom cupboard. We're not allowed to speak to an imam to gain knowledge. Brothers have unfettered access. Others have given excuses or reasons such as, my parents never gave me Islam. All I heard was lots of rules, haram, haram, haram. There was no encouragement. We never grew up in a functional family. We have other reasons for people who have said we don't have role models in our society. There is also widespread acknowledgement amongst a wider community of people is that their religious literacy is very low or very little. So, and when they do come to the mosques to learn, in the UK especially, all they have learned is a rudimentary parrot fashion recitation or regurgitation of a memorized verses of the Quran, rather than intellectual, enlightened thinking and a deeper relationship. So when I spoke about this issue from these perspectives, the community is connected. They want to know how we can return some of our children who are leaving. For me, and I'll put it out to you, we are only 3 million in the UK. In this 3 million Muslim community, even if one child was to leave Islam, and the reason why that child left Islam was somehow because of my lack of presenting Islam properly, or providing adequate facilities, or being a role model, or providing the space where they can grow, I would be very concerned and very worried. So I raised it, and most people in the community have accepted that there is a problem, but we now need to talk about it, and we need to find a solution for the UK Muslims. And I'm pretty certain we could learn from the South African model and see how successful you guys have been in navigating this pitfall and safeguarding your children.
Thank you so much. Professor Abdul Qadir, is there a need for modern, relevant, enlightened approach to topical issues by the ulama fraternity?
It's very difficult to answer that question, but I think that, what it would certainly appear, certainly from what Sheikh Masroor has raised. He has raised fundamental issues that need to be addressed. I think it's much more that can be addressed simply in a khutbah. There are lots of issues,
yes,
and it cannot be raised just by saying, okay, we need to go back to the earlier scholars of Islam, or we need to go back to the Hadith or Quran. Unfortunately, it's not going to be solved like that. There are problems that are that go very deep as such. So I'm wondering whether we are ready to do actually that. In the modern world, which I've been talking about, I think there have actually been a lot of different very different ideas that have been proposed about how to promote, a kind of a different approach to Islam, interpretation of Islam. But unfortunately, almost everyone who has actually raised those issues has actually landed in Europe, for example, or in the West, because they have not been tolerated. So I think that one has to raise, and that includes South Africa, for example. I would say I could actually, I can speak at length about our experience in South Africa, but there's no time for that. So I think that what concerns me is that it's not the question that are there, but the response to those questions.
Okay.
And the response to those questions have been based on defensiveness. To say, if somebody says that Muslim women are not allowed in the mosque, then we say, no, but in the time of the Prophet, women were allowed in the mosque. But actually, for 1200 years, they're not allowed in the mosque. You find fatwa after fatwa saying you cannot do that. You find women inside the mosque, then you put them upstairs. When you put them upstairs, then you put a curtain over them, you cannot see them. So actually it's much more deeper than just to say, you know what, these are the problems. So basically, I'm saying that the response to those questions, even when those responses have actually come from a very deeply defensive position. And I think that blocks any kind of engagement. So I would say that yes, we certainly need to think about these issues more broadly, but I don't only need to think about them. And I think this is my criticism of those people who have offered solutions. Because when they have offered solutions, they've only offered really good intellectual ideas. Because you also need to implement them somehow.
Practically.
You need to actually demonstrate them somewhere. Well, we have to basically be afraid sometimes that unfortunately our ulama in our societies will close down these places. If you start a new mosque, for example, if you start an idea that you want to establish in a new organization in the Muslim world or even in South Africa, there's a very good chance that you will get vilified for that. So what people do is that they leave it at the level of the intellectuals, but you don't necessarily see it being implemented. So we basically have this constant battle going on among the different groups, and we don't necessarily see a development as such. But if I may be, I know my time is a little bit out, but if I could just one more thing. I think we cannot dissociate what we are doing, what we are talking about here now from the broader political question. I think that includes UK as well in South Africa. Muslims in South Africa have grown under colonialism and then apartheid. They've been protected from these kind of questions. In the UK, you are not protected. You go into the schools, and the schools are very well administered. I mean, they're not perfect, but at least there's always a watchful gaze on what is going on in the school. So you are forced to deal with these issues. Ibn Khaldun said, that the people generally follow the religion of their rulers. So I think that this is one of the biggest questions that we're facing. No matter how good the questions are coming from, the questions that are being raised by Professor Masroor and Sheikh Masroor and others, at the end of the day, we cannot deny the fact that a sort of a Western or secular or whatever modern as such culture is so dominant in our society. The people who think that they are doing it because they are thinking about these things, that you are actually, according to Ibn Khaldun, just following the rulers. So the challenge is now for Muslims to actually, if you want, first of all, we cannot deny that. We are living in a world dominated by that. Our approach has been generally defensive. And so therefore we need to get out of the defensiveness and we begin to see what we can do. So in Muslims in Britain, for example, when I look at the khutbah of the Sheikh, for example, all of those are hot button issues raised by the British. Women in the mosque, these issues, why parenting, all of those are the issues that the British are raising, pointing fingers at Muslims. You are not doing something. I think we need to turn the table around. I'm not saying we don't have to address those issues, but we also need to think about what are the values that are existing within the society that is making a contribution to Britain. Where can we actually turn around and rather than simply being defensive, to say actually, can we make something to the society?
In other words, we need to become more proactive.
Yes, because we have been focusing too much on Muslim identity. How do people see us? And unfortunately, I see this khutbah also, we are constantly trying to create a better PR image for ourselves. Rather than saying we have to do what is good for us and what is good for the society. There are countless problems in South Africa and in the UK. Those problems are not about Islam. Those are problems in South Africa, you know enough about them. Those problems, I think that there are values in there that Muslims should start thinking about
And that's on to
for the good of the society, rather than for the good of your own small little group that you've got, or then being completely overwhelmed by the criticism that is coming from outside.
Okay. Sheikh Mohammed West, what role is our system of education playing with regards to this disturbing issue?
So, subhanAllah, we know that a big part of the problem and a big part of the solution is going to begin with Iqra and reading and learning. And if we look at the way we teach our kids, we have sort of secular studies. You go to school and then you are told to, if you are successful, to aspire to go to university and to qualify, in a secular sense. Look at the amount of time and effort and encouragement that goes to that secular learning versus religious learning. So already we've divorced the two, which is a problem to begin with. Islam never separated science from religion. This is all from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if we look at, we've separated these two, and we've definitely prioritized the one over the other. If we look at how much time, how much money, how much resources are going into it. Both our colleagues here are from UCT, perhaps the best university in Africa. But do we have anything close from an Islamic perspective, even though the first university was an Islamic university? So we've definitely fallen very behind in terms of our how much priority and how much emphasis we've given on religious learning. Ilyas mentioned that there are different levels of Islamic knowledge. The Prophet ﷺ spent 13 years working on the ihsan, working on the spirituality, proving Islam from an intellectual and a spiritual way. And once the people accepted that, he then focused on the rules. You can't begin with the rules and the ahkam, because then it becomes just a list of haram and haram, which people will naturally reject. And so, I give you an example. My 9-year-old, I'm sitting with her revising her Islamic studies. I'm becoming frustrated. I'm becoming annoyed and saying, it's like, pulling teeth. For me, I can imagine for a 9-year-old how it's like a punishment learning Islamic studies, memorizing things that are not required to be memorized. Niyaz before salah. The Prophet ﷺ never said it. Why are we forcing this upon our kids? So these are, I think from a societal perspective, we haven't given much emphasis, we haven't prioritized, and to be honest, we spend more on our DSTV than on madrasa. Now that shows you we've prioritized entertainment over our kids' religious knowledge. And then yes, we do point the finger at our religious institutions, our ulama, our teachers. Are they qualified? They might be qualified from a Sharia perspective, but from a teaching perspective, are our syllabi still stuck 1,000 years ago? Are we preparing them for the challenges of today? When our focus is, and many kids only study until primary school, high school. They don't have time. Rugby practice, ballet lessons become more of a priority than Islamic studies. That's a reality. So you are illiterate Islamically. Now, do you really think you would have the ability, when you're faced with these questions now at high school or varsity, your deen is being questioned, the very complicated areas of Islamic law, stoning and hijab and these kind of complicated issues, when you are put to the test, you're going to crumble. You don't want to be an outsider. You want to be accepted as a young person. So our institutions, categorically, we are not preparing our kids for the modern age. What do we do about it? That's the question.
Let's take that question and put it to Ilyas. What are the main problem issues among youth in terms of how relevant Islam is on campus?
Yeah, so I'd like to associate myself with Sheikh West. I totally agree with what he said. I think that Imam Ghazali said something amazing. He said that worshipping Allah is invalid until you know Him. So we first have to know Allah first, and then the worshipping comes afterwards. And I firmly believe that once you establish that relationship with your Creator, the salah follows, the hijab follows. All these things follow because you want to please your Creator. You don't want to disappoint your Creator. So I think that we have to first strategize and say, what is the most important knowledge that our youth need to be seeing at this point, and make a distinction between information and wisdom. The big problem in today's world is that there's too much information, and the real things that are elevating you in terms of your iman are being diluted in various respects. I also think that there are lots of barriers to religion. There are a lot of people that want to become closer to Allah, but maybe they are being shut out because they may not be dressing in the right way. Now obviously this is not a debate about what is haram and what is halal, but the question is, how do we apply this in the modern context? How do we enforce these things? Do we enforce it out of fear, or do we enforce it out of love? And our sunnah is always a sunnah of love. قُلْ إِن كُنْتُمْ تُحِبُّونَ اللَّهَ فَاتَّبِعُونِي يُحْبِبْكُمُ اللَّهُ. If you love Allah, follow Rasulullah, and Allah loves you. So we have to show our children Rasulullah not just through our words, through our actions. We have to speak in the way Rasulullah spoke. We have to show our children him not just on the books, on the bookshelves, but through our character, through our actions. Because really, as Muslims, we don't, our sunnah is clear, our Quran is there for us, Allah gave us the Quran. We just have to learn it, we have to understand it, we have to live it. And that's how we improve our society.
Thank you. Gentlemen, we've got exactly 4 minutes left. So, Sheikh Ajmal, is there a similar pattern emerging on this very disturbing topic in other parts of Europe and the rest of the world? Have you perhaps been able to get some information on that?
I've been speaking to colleagues and friends as well as other imams in Europe. Unfortunately, it is on the rise in Europe too. So we need to, of course, address that. I was just thinking about what Sheikh Hawais earlier on said. The first university, known university 1,000 years ago, university in Fez, known as the Qarawiyyin University, was founded and funded by a Muslim sister called Fatima al-Fihr. Now, we know Ibn Khaldun, that was quoted earlier on, comes from Tunisia. I went to see his house only recently. We have a long tradition of not creating misogyny barriers for our sisters. And we have a long tradition of inclusive and scholarship from our sisters. But what we're seeing, especially in the UK, amongst the Asian communities, Pakistanis, Bangladeshis and Indians, is that they have brought their cultural misogyny here and they're trying to impose it. And when Professor talked about how it may be others making an agenda for us, actually that is not correct. We see it with our own eyes. More than 80% of British mosques don't have space for sisters. And the few that have space for sisters, there are broom cupboards. And I was worried about that. I thought maybe I'm just making it up. So I did a survey. It's a basic survey. And about number of sisters who took part, majority of them were sisters. You should read what they said. We feel excluded. We feel second-class citizens of the mosque. We feel outsiders. If our mothers feel that way, are we surprised more sisters are leaving Islam? So my recommendation is very simple. We don't need to worry about what others are thinking about us. It's not a peer exercise. It's about introspection, looking at ourselves and seeing where we are and what can we do to make it better. It is about us presenting Islam to our children, of course, but to also a wider society. In UK, I'm only 3%. 97% of the population are not Muslims. So it's very important to have the messaging right. It's very important for our imams to be able to speak the right language in the right way, to present Islam adequately and be trained in those disciplines. I'm asking for an introspection and not throwing the baby with the bathwater. Recognizing that our children are very valuable, we need to keep them, but we also need to make sure that we present Islam loyally, authentically, but contextually.
Thank you so much. Sheikh Ajmal, before you go, Professor Abdul Qadir, just maybe in a minute, some final comments from yourself.
Yeah, I would just say that it's a very difficult issue, this particular issue that you're raising. So it's not going to be easy just to say, this or that. And I don't want to respond, to what the Sheikh just mentioned. But what actually has struck me, in the South African question, in the South African debate on, say, women in the mosque, for example. What has struck me a lot is that in many cases, for example, Muslim women in South Africa, particularly the ones from South Asia, from Pakistani, Indian origin, for example, don't want to go to the mosque. So
I'm not quite sure whether that would be the absolute position, especially with the younger.
No, you may contest what I'm saying as such. All I'm saying is that based on my research, what I'm actually saying is that the idea that women, I'm not saying therefore women should not have a place, we shouldn't have it, but I think even that should actually be questioned. Why is it for 100 years, for example, and it is a fact that at some point in time, the ulama or the religious scholars decided women should not actually be going to the mosque. At least some scholars, they never made it compulsory, for example, or for some reason or the other. We can talk about that. But now, for example, it is considered to be an absolute condition. And I'm saying it is not just suddenly coming up. It is something that we need to look at. And I think one of that is not necessarily to say that I'm not necessarily advocating that we should not have a place for mosque. I think the top mezzanine should go into the bottom here in this mosque. Okay. Yeah. But what I think we should actually begin to look at is that the mosque is not everything in Islamic culture. A lot of things are happening outside the mosque.
That's true.
So basically, you know, if you go to South Asia, for example, the little that I know about Urdu poetry, Urdu culture, never takes place, at least a lot of it is outside the mosque. So when we start investing our whole culture, society in the mosque, I think that in itself is a problem. Because that actually takes us out of the society.
So you feel that it should be a much more broader perspective?
It's called the modern privatization of religion.
Okay, I understand.
This is not privatization. So basically what comes insidiously as such a huge, important problem is an enlightened project, but actually at the end of the day, it's actually a kind of a project that conforms to the society. And I'm not saying the Sheikh should not actually raise these issues. It may well to do that, but I hope it's not just a PR exercise so that the British know that, oh, we are dealing with these issues. Oh, like that's the point I'm saying.
Okay.
It should not be a PR exercise. It should actually be a deep introspection, a history. We have this great history to actually look at, and it means that we have to ask some really difficult questions. But those difficult questions should be posed to us, but also in the societies that we live.
Sheikh Mohammed West, some final comments from you?
So alhamdulillah, as we can see, it's quite a much deeper discussion than on face value, and it requires from different strands of our community, our ulama, and progressive Islamic movements, modern Islamic thought to look at what the issue is. And it only becomes relevant when someone in your own family renounces the faith. Then it's worse than death, really, that pain. And so the first step is, as we're saying, is we're having the conversation. We're having the courage to talk about it and to look at us internally before we look at the external factors at our own house. What can we do? What can we fix? Ilyas mentioned that there is still many barriers for people to get connected. Now that's my problem as an imam. I need to make sure those barriers are not there, that anyone feels safe to come to the masjid or to come to the imam, to have my number and say, I have a question. There'll be no judgment. We are here to have a discussion. I looked at the khutbah that Sheikh mentioned, and all those points that he put on there are all correct. I don't think the order was meant to be in a specific order. I think one thing that is missing there is that, as what happens when you become a teenager, you start forming your own opinions. And it's not so much what your parents believe and your imam believes, but it's your peers, and your forums that you're part of, your associations. And the Nabi Sallallahu says this, that you are on the religion of your best friend. Now, if our kids, outside of the home and outside the safety of the masjid, there's no Islamic association at all. They're not part of an MSA. They're not part of any fun, Islamic fun, good, wholesome environment. Naturally, when they're forming their opinions, and Islam is outside of that discussion, Islam will not be part of the people they become. So when you become 20, 25, the big decisions of your life, what am I going to be, who am I going to get married to, has been formulated without any Islamic background. And I think that is the critical point for us, is to be part of those discussions at that point in time. If they are not coming, as Ilyas says, that they are not being connected, we need to make sure, from a masjid committee perspective, from an ulama perspective, as teachers, to get them into connect. On the platform, if they want to have it around a braai, they want to have it in a camp, they want to have it, a games evening with 5 minutes nasiha, let them dictate and we will accommodate them. We are here to sell the religion, to give them their morals and their values, have that conversation. I think that is something tangible we can do, inshallah.
Your final comments?
Yeah, I think Islam is not confined to a place. Obviously the masjid is the place where we come together and congregate and we learn about our religion, but الَّذِينَ يَذْكُرُونَ اللَّهَ قِيَامًا وَقُعُودًا وَعَلَى جُنُوبِهِمْ, those who remember Allah standing, sitting and on their sides in every single environment. That's the religion that we have to cultivate. I think that we also have to create a society that focuses on education, wisdom and love. And just to end off, my Sheikh who used to say to me, spread Islam through your state, not through your statements.
Thank you. Sheikh Ajmal, Professor AK, as well as Sheikh Mohammed West, and I'm deliberately leaving out Ilyas. I think we may agree on a lot of points and we may disagree on a lot of points. But I'd like to end off this part of tonight's Sunday Forum by saying that we have a young man here with us today in the studio. And if anybody is going to be able to give us some inspiration and hope for the future, it's the fact that Ilyas Amin is indeed a torchbearer of Islam. He's just completed his honors in neuroscience and physiology. He's a student at Medina Institute, chairperson of the University of Cape Town Muslim Students Association, a fourth-year medical student, and also founder of a platform called Teutonic, which is an online mathematics platform. And I think if we can end up the discussion by saying that it is in the hope and prayer of having more Ilyas Amins around, inshallah, that the flag of Islam would be flying continually very, very high. Thank you to each and every one of you. Thank you very much. Shukran, Sheikh Ajmal Masroor. It's been an absolute honor to have you on the program here today, all the way from London.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you for your time and your honesty. Thank you
so much. Thank you so much. Yeah, so that was a very interesting discussion that we had on a topic called are our children disconnecting from religion? If so, and why? Thank you to a very, very great panel. And immediately after the break, we will have the second part of your discussion, which is a much more positive discussion. Dr. Syed Parker will take you on an amazing journey of the great contribution our young people are making in shaping the new South Africa.
تذكر يوما كنت تعانق دمعة الفكر تناجي الله في صبر وترجو رحمة تسري فعاش القلب إخلاصا وصرت تحوم كالطير تحلق في ثقافات وتنهل من ربى الخير ترى ما زلت تذكرها وتذكر روعة.
The Mail and Guardian is one of South Africa's most respected publications. Hussein, tell us, why has the 200 Young South Africans initiative remained so close to your organizational DNA?
Sahir, it's all about celebrating young people, building their skills and giving something back to our nation. And this really has been the backbone of what the MG stands for. If you look at our newsroom over the past 3 decades, you'll notice that many of the great journalists in our industry were trained here, and we continue to do that. You know, names that come to mind are people like Anton Harbour, Fidel Afiji, Monli Makanya, Nick Dawes, all luminaries of our industry. Nick Dawes, in fact, left the MNG a few years ago to become the editor of the Hindustan Times in India. Oh. And so all of this underpins the quality of the work that we do here and the benefits of the training and experience that accrues to the individuals who have been part of this organization for many years. And then 14 years ago, we embarked on this project, focusing on our youth. And so here we are today, still focused on giving young people the platform they need to take their careers to the next level. And when we choose a flagship project at the MNG like the 200 Young, it has to align to our ethos, to the work that we do and what we advocate for. And that ethos of truth, authenticity, and credibility and social impact of our reporting has made the MG what it is today. And when we see young individuals pursuing a cause that aligns to this ethos, that's when we showcase them.
Thank you, Hussein. And that is an unenviable job, I would imagine, to go through South African youth and try and pick out such a small subsample of what is a collection of incredible young people. So can you just briefly explain how the selections are done by the Mail and Guardian in terms of selecting the 200 young South Africans on an annual basis?
Sure. So every year we open up nominations for South Africans to tell us who they believe should be celebrated and whose work should be highlighted. And this year was no different. I mean, even during the pandemic, every year we get more nominations than the previous year. And just to show the reach of this initiative, this year we had more than 6,000 nominations. So when you nominate someone, you have to motivate why you have nominated them and then choose a category that they would best fit into. And then we have a panel which comprises of some of our members of our editorial team and a few external parties who then read each nomination.
Wow.
And then the list is reduced to 400 finalists. And then the more grueling part begins because all the information must be verified and fact-checked. And then the editorial team takes over again and chooses the final 200 lists. So this year was a little bit different. We had a broad discussion about how we highlight the work done by frontliners during this pandemic. And we came up with a special category called the Editor's Choice Nominations, which celebrated some of the hardworking, bright, and innovative young people in our country who were at the forefront of the pandemic and who literally placed their lives at risk during this process. And then I do get calls. Yes, I indeed do. Family members and friends call me to see whether I can do anything to get their names onto the list. And having lived in Johannesburg for 25 years, I've learned a line which best responds to this type of call. And all I say is, make dua. And that keeps them quiet. And this just reinforces the integrity of the process, Sire, because even I as CEO can do absolutely nothing to influence the final decision. And the 200 individuals you find on this list, including our panelists, who are there with you, are there because they genuinely excelled in the areas of expertise.
Certainly, certainly. And that's something I can agree with you on. I've been following the 200 young South Africans for a number of years, and the integrity with which those selections are made and the quality of the finalists has been of exceptional quality and value to South Africa across the years. Now, Hussein, being the CEO of one of the most respected publications in the country, you have an eye on important South African and regional changes. From your perspective, what are the most pressing, on the one hand, challenges, but then on the other hand, opportunities for young people as we enter a new decade?
I think the challenges create the opportunities, and try to think what they are. I'd say it's innovation and technology. So every country on the continent has to innovate to compete on an international level. And by not doing so, we'll all just stagnate while the rest of the world will just gallop ahead. And innovation and technology permeates every single industry and sector. And it'll be the heartbeat of our economy very soon. And innovation, of course, is best led by our youth. So we need more concerted efforts to highlight this. We need to find investment to support the good work that some of these young people are doing. Mm-hmm. And if you read through the supplement, you'd be blown away by the way traditional processes and business models have been completely dislocated and reconstructed to ensure far greater efficiencies in future, which will no doubt lead to better margins for the enterprises that have been early adopters of these business processes. So that's where I see the opportunities for these young individuals come about.
That is especially true when we take into account the advent of the fourth industrial revolution and the importance of disruptors and the difference that they make to every single part of the economy. Now, just coming back to the 200 young South Africans, I mean, the initiative covers multiple sectors from health, education, as you've mentioned, civil society, sport, the arts is a critical and long-term part of the categories. From your perspective, how important are these platforms for young people, particularly as they begin their careers, and more importantly, as they begin to foster their contribution to a South Africa of the future?
Well, firstly, the reason why we have quite a number of categories is to ensure that young people don't feel that excelling in a certain field is lesser than any other. Sure. So we need young people to throw themselves into the hard work of building our country on a holistic basis. And what matters most, of course, is the impact they have made and that they continue to make in the sector of their choice. So certainly what we have noticed and highlighted is the amount of innovation and new methodologies that some of these individuals have been able to bring to bear across many, many sectors. So I think it's important that we do sort of expand the scope and allow for a greater amount of categories for people to be submitting nominations.
Sure. And then just linked to that, the role of civic participation and community involvement is critical towards democracy building, particularly in a young democracy like South Africa. And throughout the last few months, and particularly through the challenges of COVID-19, we've seen young people across the world, from presidents to civic leaders, taking roles within the communities that have created long-term change. How have young people taken the lead in South Africa through your experience of looking at, as you said, 6,000 applicants in this year's 200 Young South Africans initiative?
Yeah, so in South Africa, it has only recently started happening And it's quite a beautiful sight, to see in our parliament when young voices from the ruling party and opposition stand up and make their voices heard, and they articulate themselves so well, And we've showcased some of them too in the past. I mean, names like Khalid Sayed, Shaira Kala, Hasi Hassan come to mind. And this allowed more young people in all spheres of society to start taking up space and changing the face of leadership. And then interacting with young people in our boardrooms gives me a real sense of hope for the future. And quite frankly, I would implore others to open up and embrace young minds and ideas, because this leads to us advancing as a nation at a far greater pace when we actually listen to the youth. And if I could just take a moment, Sahir, to reflect on the Cape Town community in particular, see how far back this has gone in young individuals making a difference. We look at individuals who've made an impact from a very early age, whom we've never quite acknowledged as early starters. I mean, I could name a few people. One is Dr. Abdul Wahab Bade, who passed away about a year ago. Yeah. And he was appointed South Africa's first non-white district surgeon in 1975 in the magisterial districts of Athlone and Wynberg at the tender age of 30, right? So I mean, it's very young to get appointed in that kind of role. Dr. Anwar Nagia, whose life your channel paid tribute to a few weeks ago, studied his activism in support of the people of Palestine at a very young age. Yeah. And then thirdly, and I have to issue a family connection disclaimer here, but it would be remiss of me not to mention Mr. Abdullah Gangrika, who launched the Wembley Roadhouse at the age of 32, back in 1976. And may Almighty grant all these early pioneers of our community Jannatul Firdaus, inshallah. They would have all been worthy of recognition as male and guardian young South Africans many years ago. And with more young leaders in our society, we are sure to have much more to celebrate in the years to come through the MNG 200 Young Flagship Project. And so through all this doom and gloom that we're experiencing right now as a country, as a nation, as a humanity, as a universe, the youth that we have showcased here certainly gives us all hope that the future will be in good hands.
Thank you for that. And definitely I echo your sentiments. I've had the honor and privilege of talking to all of those senior members of our community who have made such an impeccable contribution. And then you mentioned people like Khalid, who's currently sitting in the Western Cape Provincial Legislature, Shaira, who's done fantastic work as well, and someone on our recent program, Dr. Zamir Bray, who's also been featured on your list a few years ago. So we are proud within our community to have such fantastic young people. Hussein, thank you for your time. I know it's a Saturday afternoon, and you've managed to take some time out of your very busy schedule to talk to us. But we've also got in studio one of the 2020 200 Young South Africans, Ms. Zainab Khair, who's a registered counsellor, a researcher with the City of Cape Town, as well as a PhD candidate who's about to finish a PhD quite shortly. Zainab was recognized in the 2020 200 Young South Africans initiative under the health category. Her key focus is to destigmatize mental health, strengthen family bonds, as well as address social ills, particularly within the City of Cape Town. Now, Zainab, welcome. Firstly, congratulations on your nomination and eventually being a finalist in the 200 Young South Africans initiative with the Mail and Guardian. Tell me, from your personal experience, mental health and related social stigma has become a significant issue, even though we rarely discuss it within our communities. How does the work that you do aim to influence, number one, and support people living with challenges within our community?
So I think previously people always thought that therapy is for people that are either have disorders or people that are considered crazy or people that, So I think that a lot of the work that I do is raising awareness through training programs, through newsletters, and through interactive spaces where people can become aware about mental health. And mental health is not just disorders. Yes. It's about emotional well-being. It's about surviving through life stresses. And all of us have life stresses. Yeah. And all of us need some support now and again. And so accessing mental health services just allows us to be able to get the emotional support that we need.
It's very important if we consider our external lives as well as our internal lives, and how we relate to ourselves and how that impacts on our relationship with other people. Now, clearly you've been recognized through the Male and Guardian Initiative for the contribution that you have made to our society. Now, especially considering the recent period across the globe, but particularly in the city of Cape Town, and the devastating impact of COVID-19 in communities across the city. What coping mechanisms have been valuable at helping people cope in what has been a particularly tough year?
So a lot of the work that I do is in low socioeconomic communities. And when we speak about coping mechanisms, we mostly speak about the things that helps you to cope with life stresses, which would include things like gardening, which would include things that you enjoy, music, baking, cooking, woodwork, whatever it is. And we often explain it that the coping mechanism doesn't take away the trauma, it doesn't take away the stress or the crisis that you are going through. But if you think of it like the rain, we can't stop the rain from coming down, yet we still use an umbrella and we still wear the rain boots and we still wear the raincoat. So that's what coping mechanisms are. They help us throughout our lives when we are having mental health issues or going through stresses or anything alike.
So you are talking about developing a resilient population.
Correct. And also to encourage people to use their coping mechanisms in time of stress. People often say that self-care is a luxury, but actually it's a priority. So I think what a lot of my work involves encouraging people to do more of what you love, because that is what builds resilience and that is what helps us through the difficult times.
Yeah. Now, clearly, I mean, a lot of the focus is on your teen and your adult populations. But what role does mentorship and secure emotional support play in developing more resilient young people, which in effect down the line produces more effective adults? Yeah. What role does mentorship play in that capacity?
I think mentorship has a significant role. So especially in our communities where there aren't role models, people look up to people like the sports coaches, they look up to the teachers, and even the NGOs that's in the communities, the youth facilitators. So by mentoring people through this process, they kind of have a hope for the future.
Yeah.
And that's the role of mentors. And also people can see if the mentor has done it, I can do it too.
Sure.
And I think mentors from the community where the person lives is so much more valuable because they can see that this person had a similar upbringing, so they can kind of connect to some extent. And that's so important when it comes to mentorship. And I suppose when it comes to mentorship, there has to be a good match. So in terms of age also, it's nice to have somebody that you can relate to better. But mentorship definitely has a huge role to play in the development of adolescents and children.
Sure. Do you feel it represents somewhat of a lighthouse in an otherwise stormy environment where young people, particularly across the Cape Flats, are growing up in?
Yes, definitely. It's a space to go. It's a space to access that support. It's a beacon of light in the challenging times. Mentors have a much greater role than just guiding and leading. I mean, I've often had cases where a child is domestic violence in the home and the child doesn't know where to go, so they immediately rush to the mentor's house because they know they'll be safe there. And they know that they'll get the necessary support there.
Sure. Talking about trauma and critically through your expertise, I would like you to touch on the aspect of emotional abuse. These often silent types of abuse that we don't generally can see nor do we talk about is very common within our communities.
Yes,
so what support avenues are available to both women and men? Because men are often the silent victims in many of these things, and we don't generally talk about it. So what avenues for support are available to both men and women within our communities who face these kinds of challenges daily?
Before I answer that, I just also want to explain the importance of emotional abuse and that we don't often speak about it. It often gets minimized in society because there's no wounds to see, right? So people often, so if somebody swears at somebody, if somebody speaks in an intimidating tone, if people are threatened, we don't necessarily say, oh, so that person's having a bad day, I need to understand, especially if it's happening in the home front. And I guess it's not okay. You know, and people need to recognize that it's not okay to be spoken down to. It's not okay to be treated less than who you are, despite any differences amongst the people. And emotional abuse does not only happen in the home, it happens at work, it happens in school, it happens everywhere. And I think the warning signs needs to be alerted. People need to become aware of the warning signs. So there are NGOs, there are private facilities that people can go to. People can access support from registered counselors, social workers, psychologists. Then there's also the NGOs. I'm thinking of Sarki Bartman for abused women and children. There's Hope House. There's the Trauma Center for Survivors of Violence and Torture. So there are avenues that for the people out there. And I'd like to encourage people to just go out and get the necessary support.
Zainab, thank you for that, and thank you for the immense contribution you make, not only to the city in the work that you do, to the community in terms of the support that you offer, but also in terms of the recognition by the Mail and Guardian. How has that changed your life, your work, and the general perception of you within your community in the short while that since it's been announced in the last 3 weeks?
I think people have been incredibly proud. I've come from humble beginnings, and people are happy to see that. For a lot of the youth that I've worked with in the communities, they know me, and they're like, if you can do it, then maybe I can do it too.
Yeah.
And I think that has been the most rewarding part of it, to be a role model for especially young girls and women, to know that, you know what, you can also do it. You can be independent, you can have an education.
Yeah.
And it's okay, it's not taboo. Previously, culturally, women did not always have the opportunities that they have today. And again, I think it's just a recognition that women can do everything that men can do.
Thank you. That we are certainly very proud, and we're very thankful to have you on our program. Thank you for making the time to come out and chat to us, and all the best with completing your PhD. That's an exciting but taxing journey, and we wish you all the best, and definitely look forward to welcoming you back on our program in the near future. Thank you for joining us today. And from one of our 2020 top 200 young South Africans, we now welcome our next guest joining us via Zoom. Dr. Firdaus Khan, welcome to the Sunday Forum. Firdaus is a previous participant in the Mail and Guardian 200 Young South Africans. In 2017, she was nominated in the Science and Technology category. And currently, Firdaus is the Director of Efficiency and Research at Pearson's Education Africa. Assalamu alaikum, Firdaus, and welcome to the program.
Walaikum salam, and shukran for having me.
Always a pleasure chatting to you, Firdaus. As we've discussed with Zainab, as we've discussed with Hussein, the Mail and Guardian 200 Young South Africans is an incredible platform that helps young people to, one, recognize their contribution, two, work towards realizing their potential and build careers in South Africa. Now tell us, since 2017, how has the recognition in the Mail and Guardian 200 Young South Africans influenced both your personal and professional life?
Sure. I think the list is quite endless. Since the nomination and then subsequently the list coming out on the list, many things have happened since then. So one of the things that actually happened straight after being nominated in the Mail and Guardian was I was nominated to represent South Africa at one of the international programs hosted through the Japanese government. And in this program, 10 South Africans were selected from South Africa to represent our country, and I managed to be one of them. And this program was centered on really looking at international collaboration and finding effective ways of really dealing with sustainable development goals, and then looking at ways to kind of partner with both local companies, international companies, and counterparts to kind of bridge that gap where we find the gaps in society. That's just one of the things that I was really at. That was also one of the biggest programs that I was part of, where 11 delegations from around the world, with the likes of Spain and Australia, Sri Lanka and India, South Africa being one, even Mozambique. And that was really one of the really biggest and most enjoyable programs. It was a 6-week program that we really went on, and we visited all these countries, and we dealt with lots of youth around the globe. And this really allowed us to impact as much as we can with this knowledge and skills that we do have.
very often in the work that you do, the knowledge, the skills, the expertise almost become intangible assets. How has your time on the Global Ship for Peace served you in terms of looking at international science diplomacy, particularly being a woman working in science, technology, and engineering and mathematics? How has networking with other like-minded women from around the world influenced your future career choices?
So, you know, when you're a woman, and especially a Muslim woman, I would say, when you're a woman, there's an expectation of what you should and shouldn't be doing, or how you should be living your life. You should be focusing on your family. You should be focusing on what is set out for women to do. And so when you do get the opportunity to travel and you really see what the rest of the world has to offer, you see the challenges people face, but you also see how they overcome those challenges. And that really puts your life into perspective. It lets you look at what is really important. How can I influence? How can I positively change people's lives by what I have and what I do? And one thing that really stands out for me, it's not really what education you have or what you can attain. It's not that. It's what you do with the skills that you have that can really set you apart from the rest. And so that's always been my key focus, looking at how I can positively change people's lives by what I know.
Thank you. Ultimately, that is our purpose. That is our purpose here. So, you know, in your role, in your current role as the director of research at Pearson's Education, what insights can you share with us related particularly to the importance of skills and education for our young people, women, men, young people in particular, as we enter the 2020s? COVID-19 has shown us that traditional economies have somehow unraveled. And how have young people been forced into this new world that in many ways we're very much unprepared for? So what are the important skills and assets that you have come across that really put young people at an advantage in the current state of our society?
So let me just take a step back. So what I currently do, or the role that I play at the organization, is really trying to create an effective and smooth way of introducing digital transformation. I mean, we find ourselves in this space where COVID hit unexpectedly and things needed to change dramatically and quickly. And so in order to allow us to really service the community the best way we can, we need to understand what our consumers need and how we can actually support them to achieve those goals. So that's kind of the role that I play at the organization. And I speak to a lot of the way we develop product. And we use evidence-based research in order to understand what our consumer needs and then develop accordingly. And so COVID really turned everything beside itself.
Yeah.
We were not expecting what happened in such a short space of time. And so it really left us open to think innovatively, you know, to bring to the market what we could and to support not only being a company that wanted to make profits, but really to help those in need. Because we find ourselves in a country where we don't have infrastructure, and that's a very big deal. Infrastructural challenges are the biggest thing. And so we needed to find effective ways of bringing information to people so that learning can continue. And so if I can just bring back to a point where our late President Nelson Mandela, he always said that education is the most powerful tool that you can have to effect change. And so if you want to be that positive change, continue learning always. Doesn't matter what you're learning. It doesn't have to be in the formal setting. It can be day to day, but how you use that information to affect change in people's lives is what ultimately matters.
That's very...
Okay, yeah.
Please continue.
You wanted to add something?
No, I said that's a very important consideration, particularly taking into account the way the world is changing. And you mentioned it earlier when you spoke about our reliance on technology and the way in which this is set up to change the world. But in an environment that lacks a significant amount of infrastructure, that is challenged in very, very, very many ways. So I think you are positioned at a time and a place in South Africa which allows you to respond to a lot of those challenges. And what has been the feedback from your user community?
Okay, so initially when this whole process happened, when COVID really hit South Africa and it really impacted the ability of our learners to actually learn in the normal way that they were used to. we've run multiple surveys in essence to gain knowledge of what our users are experiencing. And so in the initial stages, Pearson really actually released free products for people to actually use across the board, both in K-12, in higher education space, etc., and post-schooling, in professional development as well. So we released some of these products that people were able to access and be able to see the value that we can bring with the products that we produce. And from the community, the help that they received from Pearson, the help that they received on an individual basis, they were really open to it. They had to make a change very quickly, and they didn't really know how to do it. And so what Pearson did was we developed a step-by-step how to guide for many of our products and how to really move from the conventional classroom to moving to the digital space and really being able to impact even at one of our most rural schools in the most rural communities. We've had people on the ground as much as they could be to try and support the community as best we can.
And those are really on the ground impacts, real grassroots kind of impacts that we are hoping to see, and many of those adds to the change that we hope to effect in this country as a whole. So it really seems to me, Firdaus, that we've taken this journey with Hussein earlier. We've spoken to Zainab, who's really illuminated us as to the important work she does and the platform that the Mail and Guardian 200 Young South Africans has afforded her. And it certainly sounds like your journey has been one of significant success. As a young professional woman, what has prepared you for your current role, and what were your biggest learnings along what has evidently been a very successful journey?
Sure, there's been many, but one thing that really stood out for me was to really never be afraid to take that first step. Sometimes you doubt yourself, sometimes you think you're not good enough, and then a platform like the Mail and Guardian comes out and it puts you on the forefront, and it makes people recognize what you have to offer. And in some way, it actually makes you believe in yourself more than what you did before. And so my words of wisdom, if I could say that, is to never be afraid to take that first step. You are your biggest cheerleader. And so if you believe in yourself, the rest of the world will start believing in you. And that's one of the biggest things that really sticks with me day in and day out. You need to be the person who pushes yourself to achieve great things.
Firdaus, thank you for making the time to join us. I know it's been a very difficult week for you, and we certainly appreciate the time that you've made available to talk to us and share some of the particularly valuable insights that you've gained in what has been a very successful career. And a lot of this started in 2017 once you completed your PhD and you were recognized within the Mail and Guardian 200 Young South Africans. So thank you for making the time, and we certainly look forward to talking to you again very soon on the Sunday Forum.
Shukran for having me.
Fascinating discussions indeed, even in a time of crisis, even during the grips of the COVID-19 pandemic. We see that young people across South Africa are still carrying their torches very, very high, making us extremely proud, particularly within the Muslim community. We want to thank again the CEO of the Mail and Guardian newspaper, Mr. Hussein Karjika, for being online with us via Zoom, Dr. Firdaus Khan, who's also joined us via Zoom this afternoon, as well as Zainab Qaeda for coming into the studio and talking to us about the immense contributions that they have made to South Africa and will continue to make into the near future. So thank you to all of you for joining us, and thank you for allowing me to host this part of the program.
Thank you there to Dr. Syed Parker for a very interesting profile of two of the Mail and Guardian 200 young South African young people. I feel very confident that the future is indeed in very good hands. Well, that's all for now. Before I go, let me say thank you once again to a brilliant production team. Thank you to Siraj Parker, Anwar Umar Rumane, Samir Parker, JJ Abdurrahman, Ishtiaq Badruddin, and our young Hafiz Bilal Mahdi. Also, special thanks to all the participants on the program today. A note of appreciation for Rosie's for some very beautiful stage decor, and to Nisa Gaby for the artwork. Until we meet again, inshallah, on the 1st of November, from the team here, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
تذكر يوما كنت تعانق دمعة الفكر تناجي الله في صبر وترجو رحمة تسري فعاش القلب إخلاصا وصرت تحوم كالطير تحلق في ثقافات وتنهل من ربى الخير ترى ما زلت